Um, so then, um, how was I putting this? You have it's kind of like massage, if you will. One's hands. I'm not going to draw that, even with my right. Hands. They're made to go into one another. Um, you. This is the idea originally. So in working your forearm, I guess he's making a debut. You probably can't see him yet, Spider. In working your forearm, I can't remember the terms. I usually switch them up with dyslexia whenever I do relearn them, but I believe the inflection or flexor and whatever the other one is. Regardless, the closing of your fist contracts the forearm muscles there, and the opening of it contracts the top muscles. I can't remember what those are called. Um, and so, in the sense, the metacarpal bones here, the tiny ones, the muscles there, I can't remember what the muscles are called, they only get stressed and contracted, swollen from closing your fist, but in order to work them, you'd have to, you'd have to do a counteract. If I have a hand, these bands, you go like that, like gloves or something, and the baby teether things, little silicone tubes, or the donuts, they sell those as hand exercise devices, which is pretty good idea. If I didn't, anyway. So it's counter, I believe, productive, meaning the more I do that motion, the smaller that muscle is going to get, the bigger that muscle is going to get, so they compete for one another. But in that sense, you use those muscles pulling your hands out of your pocket or something like that, or breaking for somebody's grip, and or maybe there are other reasons, and so but the benefit is that your hands contracted forever. If you're, I don't know, doing things, labors, things like that, basically anything, holding a paint stick is no different than weightlifting or something like that if you do it enough and so on. But the idea is, one, it's in a way painful. It's just the idea of having that stress, and you wouldn't possibly know unless somebody had showed you contractive or whatever the opposite motion is. And I've learned how to do that as well. But then think about the muscles in other areas. Basically, the entire back of your body. It kind of looks like maybe a human version of monkey. Scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, but that's kind of like a animalistic version. Whereas it's a social, psychological added layer of reality where we can function to provide for one another in a virtual sense that almost it doesn't bend the laws of nature, but it builds upon them in a constructive way that also builds on us mentally and socially. And for instance, you can't give yourself a back massage, and if you are very, very tired or you work your back a lot, you cannot unlock those muscles very easily on your own. And then if you could have somebody have the experience of, say, massaging your hands, say like a physical therapist or an athletic masseuse, or your back in certain muscles, or you have an injury and you can't physically kind of put the muscle back into place or pop a dislocated superficial like rib or something that's not like terrible, but it's just like an ache. Um, and then imagine somebody providing that for you. It would be like the difference between night and day. I have to open a window. I'm sorry. I'll have to edit this. Maybe the edits make it more interesting. Anyway, this thumb loop is really important. Um, Excuse me. So in having that experience and having that possibility for experience, it's like an added layer. If we didn't have the capacity to function in that way, socially, therapeutically, uh, through that knowledge of the body and the self, through that, and with the intentions to maybe not overwrite or supersede, but or even undermine, but to do something better or more beneficial than the monkey see, monkey do, or scratch my back, I scratch yours, because that's literally like, if you take that into modern day humans or civilized life, if you want to call it civilized, but that's kind of like animals that became something else. Not really, shouldn't say that. It becomes like a gang type extortion slash narcissist slash doggy dog world type thing of what kind of quid pro quo. I didn't say that right. Pro quo. Anyway, and so that's kind of if we look at it just a purely pleasure based version, it degrades back to that. Basically, like almost like pleasure horism or something. I guess he's just watching. I don't know if he's visible. And so the way that works, is so amazing. These silly stick figures I resort to drawing. Gotta be careful. And so I'm not gonna. There we go. Now we got a female. Straight up, first grade. The size difference. Okay, what they're functioning to do. The essence behind how we're formed seems, I don't want to put the yin yang, but it's literally like two hands, like a big, I'm not gonna try look like raptor claws, chicken feet, tap dancing, alright, doing a handshake, they're having a thumb war, but the way that the masterfulness, or maybe that's not the right word, the creative compatibility and variation and I guess alternation in that sense, but it's really complementary. It's so complex we couldn't do it. We couldn't come up with shapes that merge together and create a larger thing that all merges together, and it's like this fractal array of meaning. But just that aspect in itself is the act of loving oneself or self-love as it could be intended if we were to use our faculties to the highest degree of our capacity to function in a beneficial manner for others, aka society. It's the very nature that we are all capable, of reaching, seeing, even noticing when we wouldn't know any other way, to help one another in ways that we can't help ourselves. And in that sense, it's as if we all start at that kind of monkey line society. Not like we were monkeys, but we're just sitting around waiting for that. And there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of that going on. And every once in a while, something good will happen, and somebody will scratch somebody's back, and so on. And maybe that's two separate situations. And then maybe if they get smart, so you get kind of like the same animalistic behavior. You have like a scratch orgy, but that's just these minds and this desire being naturally driven by like process of electromagnetism or water going to the easiest path, or the path of least resistance. And it's going to happen, it's going to build up. The dynamics, the variables are going to align coincidentally according to a natural timeline of a buildup of desires and necessities to a point where they'll overlap, and some will be complementary, and those that are complementary, they'll discover naturally that by working together they can gain a collective goal more quickly with less energy applied. But those, it won't be self-willed, because when those variables that naturally line up fall out, they'll fall down, and you'll have to wait over time for them to pile back up, and they won't have control over their own pleasure pain variation based upon their ability to work with one another. And so, now I distracted myself. In that sense, once one of the monkeys realizes you can push one of the part of the lumbars. That that's what happened. They were scratching each other's back one day, and he cracked his back, and now he walks upright. And that's how man was born from monkey scratch. And so the idea is that now, once this happens, it's up to them to realize it, to know. And this is a metaphor because it's really all humans, and we're acting in certain ways that cloud our ability to see what's really possible, and it holds us back. And every once in a while, it's bound to happen that we benefit one another in those ways that overlap. But it's up to us to secure that, to maintain the requirements for those variables, or at least the variables that are required in order to have our environment function to enable that, and it is as well to have our mental environment, which creates, it's that social aspect, which literally creates a virtual environment, which is more or less society. There's a physical counterpart, okay, but then that's the mental aspect, which is the kind of it's the gate or the barrier. It's like the CPU, if you will. You could say it's kind of not really where I wanted to take the metaphors, but maybe this is like the hard drive, if you will, because it's an abundance of all the information that's just building up and happening. Only when you get it organized through this processing system, if you will, this processing event of organization of synchronicity, basically, of synchronizing the different desires and needs and necessities into a system, a function that takes all these possibilities and these round ones and squares them into units, discrete units that we can go to in time and choose how we're going to help somebody. And again, this was kind of, maybe that's how things were, and now we just have work where it's literally a grid and you can't really, you gotta, if you're in the time grid, it's all siphoning up to something which is on the bottom. But then it used to be just, I don't know, like a tree of life or something in the movies, or even in Africa, where it's kind of curvy, and if you don't want to do that, well, you can go this way because this is what you want to do, but you don't want to do it for this reason and this purpose and that outcome, but you can go right here next to it and it's the same thing that works for you. We kind of got that removed, and maybe that's coming back, but we don't have to go back to the jungle, if you will, and lose the ease of access and the not modern, but not the mechanical organization, the efficiency that we gain through technology and